Hey, Brian.
Hey, Laura. Welcome to CarePayment, Patient Financing, Consumer Financing Series 101. Excited to have you here today and talk a little bit about financing in general, patient financing as well. But today, really want to focus the conversation on financing in general, right? And I know a lot of providers are offering financing today in one way or another, many times through internal payment plans. If you took that away, right, from a provider's ability, I think the staff would sit there and say it's more difficult to collect from the patient, right? They started doing that out of a need because they heard patients saying, I can't afford the $3,000, $5,000. If you looked at the environment without financing, in a provider setting, you take away a huge tool that staff use today to capture and engage a patient along the financial conversation. In the non-healthcare setting, it would make things, very unattainable for consumers. And that's one big thing of we want to help increase access to care, right? We want to help those patients. So
absolutely, you're going to remove certain segments of the population from access to those goods and services. And in healthcare, we know that is the holy grail is to always have access and availability from the provider's perspective. They want to make sure they serve everybody in their community. That finance is now not only, something that the consumer expects to be able to from a transactional standpoint, but also they're very used to that experience. They're used to that being an added value.
And the quicker adoption of financing will help patients get the care they need more quickly. You see a lot of patients, and we talk about care avoidance. You see a lot of patients out there that are avoiding care because of they haven't met their deductible, right? They've got that $2,000, $3,000. They're not in a position to come out of pocket to get their knee fixed, right? To get the surgery that they need. So having financing in place can actually get the patient in there to get the care they need, help from a provider perspective, capture more revenue, build brand loyalty, and build patient satisfaction with that provider with offering a financing solution. But the net is there are very real retail strategies that are applicable to the healthcare space that can drive revenue, can prevent bad debt expense, can increase loyalty, brand loyalty to a patient, to the organization, and accelerate revenue from a patient perspective. And then there's the clinical aspect, right? It's not a healthy patient if they're sitting on the sideline not getting a procedure because they're worried about the cost. So a lot of the social aspect here is bridging that affordability gap, right? How can we enable and empower the patient to seek the care they need and live the healthiest lives that they possibly can through access to care? And one of the biggest hurdles to the access to care that's really applicable here is the cost barrier. And addressing that cost barrier on the front end and making sure that the patient knows they have an option will help the patient get the care they need, and it will help put the provider in a position to capture the highest percentage of earned revenue that they're entitled to. So Laura, anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right. When my experience on the consumer side of marketing big brands, as well as obviously in healthcare, what we always say is there's still only one pocket of the consumer, right? So they are looking at a single wallet to be able to manage their monthly, annual, whatever those expenses are. And that includes healthcare. I think I read recently that the average American has about $1,600 a month worth of loan payments. And that's everything from, obviously, as you just mentioned, mortgages to car loans, credit cards. And a lot of times, quite honestly, in healthcare, it is the consumer that is really driving for the healthcare providers and others to meet them where they are in that financing habit.
One thing that I do think is very interesting in this space is not a lot of the people that ultimately own the product are involved in the financing, right? They partner with third parties to execute on that. So historically, providers have offered payment plans, had offered financing internally and on their books. Now we're seeing a lot of providers kind of come to the realization that that's not a core competency of billing on a regular monthly basis, just like it's not a core competency of Toyota, Honda, Best Buy, Home Depot, right? They partner with folks to do that, and that's an expertise. So bringing that technology, bringing that aspect, that experience to the healthcare space is very important. One of the big things that we're seeing change right now is more patients are asking for financing on the front end, whereas historically the solution has, the financing aspect has been deployed post-care delivery, right? So many times patients would get care, then they would realize they have a large bill, and then they would say, I need help. In a more retail-like environment, financing is at the front of the conversation, right? And many times it's what's driving the sale, or it's what's driving the consumer making that purchase. We are seeing that shift in the healthcare space. You see things like No Surprises Act requiring estimates to be provided to patients. So you're having to publish the out-of-pocket or an estimate of what that out-of-pocket expense is going to be, which then triggers that natural consumer in our DNA response of how am I going to afford this?
And I'd add to that, that proliferation of the advertising of consumer products at point of sale across all these industries has also served to educate the consumer about what financial products are, and what are the options out there, whether it be a line of credit, a credit card, any kind of, home equity loans, things like that. They've become quite savvy. Certainly financial literacy is still a huge concern. So maybe sometimes they're not as financially literate about the things they should be, but they're certainly very used to things like interest rates and credit cards and down payments and that type of language, and they're looking for it in their evaluation of financial products. But even more so, that affordability issue in healthcare is, clinically could be detrimental, right? So we want to make sure that people understand that these financing vehicles are not just a convenience, but they certainly are, could be a lifeline to consumers, to patients, to be able to connect with their providers and get the care they need. And that's why it's so critically important that people are educated about financing, just in general. So financing can be that ability to ensure that there's access to all, and there's kind of an open lane of availability of that clinical care. It's an interesting point to bring up, just to kind of flip it and kind of shocks you into thinking, well, gosh, I mean, there's a lot of downstream negative impacts if you did that.
It's in place today, but the real opportunity is, how do you maximize its effectiveness, right? How do you maximize the deployment? How do you maximize the education to the patient consumer about the options that are out there? How do you make it as patient friendly? So thank you, Laura.
Yeah, thank you, Brian.